we're going to fabricate a beef rib 109 to standing rib roast, heart steaks, Scarapelli, back ribs, bones, fat, and trim to grind. Alright? So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take it. You can see that it's standing rib roast, it's roast ready, so it is wrapped in jet net. It has the cap that has been reattached. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove that cap and the jet netting. So we're just going to take that jet netting off. And then once we have the jet net off, we're going to go for the cap. So before we go to the cap, it gives us an opportunity to talk about where it comes from on the animal. So when we first look at this, we can see that we find some bones or some identification. So this end, you can tell this end goes to the chuck, and we know that because the ribs are here, right? So here's the shortest rib, so that'd be the upper portion of the ribeye, and then as we go down the ribeye, that's where it goes into the larger portion of the rib cage, and this goes into the chuck. So we'd have the chuck in front of it, we'd have the head in front of that, so then we have the chuck, then we have the ribeye, and then behind that we'd have the short loin, sirloin, and so on. So we are going to start by removing the fat cap from the top. So we're going to lay it down. You can see the fat cap right here, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in at this natural seam right here. I'm going to fold it up and peel that meat up and off. Just peel it back, and that comes back like that. Once I have it back to this point, then I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to come right in against the back side, and I'm going to follow that down. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling it towards me, close to the bone, and I wiggle the blade so that I can pull it back. I'm going to set that off to the side for a second while I fabricate that cat meat. So all you're going to do on the cat meat is I'm going to remove the meat from that cap. I'm going to cut down all the way here. Right, and then once I have that cat meat off, then I'm basically just going to go through and remove this meat from that fat as well. I don't want to lose it. It's tasty meat, but I also don't want it to just get thrown away as fat. So I'm just going to come back. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time because I'm generally going to grind this. So I'm just going to take the meat away from the fat. All right, and I'm going to start my fat pile. Now, my fat pile, I can actually use that to render to make tallow, and I can use that tallow for cooking in. If I wanted to make soap, I could use it to make soap and so on and so forth, but I'm not throwing it away. Okay, so here we can just come in and come on this side and just follow that down. You want to get in close, but you're not going to freak out going over every square inch to remove every little chunk of fat, because again, I'm going to turn it into grinding, and I'm going to turn this into fat for rendering into tallow. So I just cut it so it's easier to package if I'm going to cryovac it or store it for later. And then I'll take this meat, once I have the excess chunks of fat out, and I'll use that for grinding. And if I'm going to grind it, I just cut it up so I make it easier to fit in my grinder. So I cut that up smaller. Once that's cut up smaller, then I'm going to pop that onto my tray for later use. Same thing here. I can see the meat. I'm going to just come in and pull that fat off. And then once I have that fat off and removed, I'm going to come back and use that. Same thing here. Just come in and pull that fat away. Once I have that down here, I'm just going to take that fat, again, cut it into smaller pieces that I can package up later for rendering. Got that small there. Okay, so this all is meat for grinding, or I could use it for stew or many different things, but that's what I'm doing with it. Okay, here, just come in from the corner. Follow that fat off. The reason I cut it into thirds is just so my knife will fit across it. I'm cutting down here to see where the beef line end or the meat separates from the fat, and I'm just going in and removing any excess. So we are going to finish trimming the meat from that cat meat. So basically, just cut it any way that makes most sense to get the meat off. And once you have the meat, the fat off, the excess fat, then you are good to go. So just trim the excess fat off. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, cool. Alright, extra fat off there. Cool. That goes into your grind pile. So we have our grind pile over there. We have our extra fat pile, and we have that so far. Now we're going to go into looking at which end. We already talked about which end came from which. So this is the end that is closest to the chuck. Now normally I would do one of the following things that I'm going to do, but just to give you an idea of what can be done with a ribeye, I'm going to show you how to make a standing rib roast. Then we're going to remove the Scarapelli. We're going to make some heart steaks, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So we're going to make a 2-bone standing rib roast. 2-bone, general rule of thumb, 2 bones is enough for 4 people. So 1 bone is 2 people, 2 bone is 4 people. We're going to come in heavy against the 3rd bone, so 1, 2, 3. We're going to cut straight down to the chine bone. So we're just going to follow that around. So come in here, follow that bone down to the chine bone, and then you should be able to just come in at the chine, and that should cut apart for you as your chine has been removed. So you're going to cut that off. We're going to work on this piece. We're going to set this big chunk aside for right now. We'll come back to that in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this essentially off the bone, and then we're going to return it to the bone. So to do that, what we're going to do is first locate where the ribs are. So the ribs are right here. So you're going to come down the ribs like this, to the chine bone, over the chine, and out the feather. Okay? So come in with your knife angled to the bone. So each time I make a cut, I'm going to pull that back. So each time I make a cut against the bones, and then I pull the meat back so I can see that I'm staying close to those bones as I cut down. Okay? So with each cut, come in a little closer, and now I'm going to use my fingers to kind of pry it open and just follow those bones down. All right, keep following it until it comes off. Okay, so I'm going to come down ribs, down to the chine bone, and the chine is the center of the spinal column. So I come to that section, and then I'm going to come over the chine and right out any feather bones that I might have. Okay? And once I get that off, then I'm going to trim it up a little bit more and get ready for wrapping up for roast. Now, I have this residual silver skin. I'm going to take that off. And follow that down. Make sure I get that nice and clean. That'll go to my bone pile. The silver skin will go to my bone pile as well. I have this nice and clean here. Take up this bit of connective tissue, can go to our bone pile. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to feel for any excess meat or excess fat that's on there, and I'll know that it's too much if it's a little thick. I'm going to trim that down a touch. Trim that fat that's a little bit hard and crusty down a touch. Okay, and then on my lip, I'm just going to cut here and here, because I don't need to take the whole thing off, but I do want to take the majority of the fat material off. And you guessed it, we can trim that meat up. That can go to our grinding pile. Makes incredible ground beef. So we just trim that down. You don't have to go crazy, but it is going to be good for ground beef. So I don't like to throw it away. I like to save it. So this is going to go to our fat pile. Here. Sorry. Awesome. Cool. So now we have our bones. Now we have our roast that's ready to go back onto the bones, and we have our bones, but they look a little awkward. So what we're going to do is, this is the feather bones that come up the back. So if we were looking about how it would come off of the animal, it would come off like this. This would be the shoulder. So if I was scratching its back, basically, I would be scratching its back right here, right? So that'd be just behind the neck, and then it would come down, and this would be where the chuck, or where the rib is, and the chuck would be in front of that. So what I want to do is, I want to come inside, scrape off the elastin from the interior of the bones, and get the excess fat out. So come in nice and close to those bones, on both sides, all the way down. Okay, so that's nice and clean, and now I'm going to take off the feather bones. That'll go to my bone pile. And I'm also going to remove these little button bones. The button bones are the residual bones or remaining pieces of the chine bone. So we're going to come in kind of at a zigzag. So we're going to come in here, back this way, and take that bone out. So come in underneath the bone, zigzag around the joint. You can see the joint right here. So I'm going to come in right against that joint, and I'm going to follow that down, pop it out of joint, come back around this way, and then I'm going to spin my blade around, and now you can see how I pop that other bone out of joint, and I'm going to come back around this way, follow that down here, follow it back around here, and then take those off. Now the whole reason I take those off is because I love ribs, right? I like baby back ribs, I like beef ribs, I like lamb, I like ribs. They're delicious. This is the part in between, and basically this would be the equivalent of a baby back rib. We took the button bones out of or the remaining chine bone out. That's going to go to our bone pile. We're also going to take this, we're going to use this as the rack for our standing rib roast. So the beauty of the standing rib roast is once you get the ribs off, they kind of have this shape. So once we strap the meat on top of it, it's going to be an amazing piece that's going to provide us a great piece for roasting. Okay? So we're going to take that piece of meat, we're going to pop it back on top of the bones. We're going to cinch it up like this, get it nice and pretty, and we're going to take twine and truss it on. So what we're going to do truss is we're going to take our trussing twine and we're going to put it down about 16 inches off the backside of the roast. So imagine that you have about 16 inches off the back of that roast. You're going to put your roast right in the middle, and you're going to take the trussing string and you're going to pull it over. So with your hand going down, so I have my trussing string going down into a bucket so it's not just randomly rolling on the floor, so you can see the bucket down below. I'm going to take my hand like this. I'm going to take my fingers, my lower two fingers, ring finger and pinky, I'm going to bend them over. Now I'm going to take the string that's on the back side, on the other side of the roast, I'm going to pull it over, I'm going to pull it tight, I'm going to put it into the crease of my middle finger, I'm going to lift my hand up, I'm going to take my left hand, put it onto the board, and I'm going to spin it into a loop until my hand is now level. I'm going to come to this point, and I'm going to open my fingers up into the peace sign. I'm going to take the string up, and I'm going to pinch it with these two fingers here, pull it through that hole, and cinch it up. Cinch it up nice and tight, so we have a nice tight roast. And then I'm going to take that string that was my left string that's not going to my bucket down below, put that back on the left-hand side. Okay. Now I'm going to take my string that's going to the bucket, my lead string. I'm going to take my left hand, take my thumb, my finger, twist, that makes a loop right here. I'm going to take that string that's now on the side, and I'm going to pull it through that hole, which is going to give me another knot so it won't come undone. Cinch that up, cut off the excess string. My trim goes into the compost pile, and I'm going to do it 2 more times. So I take my string, I lay it down, I place my roast on top of the string, right on the edge of the table. Take that string, pull it tight. My lead string goes down below. Take my ring finger and my pinky finger and fold them over. Take this string, the extra string, take my middle finger, crease it up slightly, put my hand on the table. Take this, my right hand now, I'm going to spin it around, and I'm going to come up so it's flat, make a peace sign, which makes a loop right in this area right here. Right here is where the loop that I'm talking about. Now I'm going to take this string over here. I'm going to lift it up. I'm going to pinch it with these two fingers right here. I'm going to pull it through there, and I'm going to cinch it up. Nice and tight. Okay? Take that string, goes back to the side. Pull the string tight. Take my left hand, up, over, pull it through, done. Now let me show you a left-handed one. So if you were at home and you're playing the game, you can't get it. So now you're going to take the string, place it down on the table, come over like this. If you're left-handed, you're going to take the string and go to the right. Okay? You're going to take the string with your left hand, grab it like this. You're going to take your ring finger and pinky finger and come over. You're going to take the string and put it into the crease of your middle finger here. Lift your finger up slightly so that it holds it up. With my hand on the table, I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to just turn it around, up, and I'm going to open my fingers up like this so that I make a little loop. My loop is right here. I'm going to take the string which was on the table, up, pinch it, pull it through, and cinch it up nice and tight. Same thing. Oop. Make sure that it's lined up. And then once we have it lined up, cinch it up nice and tight. Right? That string is going to go back to the right. Now I'm going to pull the string tight with my right hand. I'm going to put my thumb on the string. I'm going to twist up this way. Did I do that right? Oh, I switched. So, yeah. Sorry. Right, up, twist, makes a loop right here. Take that loop, grab it, pull it through, done. Take the excess string goes into the compost pile, and now I'm just going to hold onto my string on the side there. Okay, tuck it under my board. Should I need it later. And now I have a standing rib roast ready to go. Beauty. So I strapped the bones on the bottom. I created an edible roasting rack, which I can eat when it's done. Beautiful. This is a standing rib roast for 4 people because it has 2 bones. Perfect. We're going to set that on the side. We're going to go back to the rest of our steak. So now we have this big beast of a ribeye. And you can see it's starting to go through a little butcher's bloom. It's starting to oxidize, which is changing the color. The different color over here is based on the fact that it has already been exposed to oxygen. So just like we fabricated the standing rib roast, we're going to come down the ribs, straight down. If we look at it from the end, I'm going to come down the ribs here. So down the ribs, back up a little bit, down the ribs, to the chine bone, over the chine bone, and out the feather. Okay? Before I do that, I'm going to spin it around. I'm going to cut this excess fat and elastin off the interior of the bones. So I'm just going to come in right against those bones and follow that nice and close. So it's kind of like revving a motorcycle. So I'm holding onto my knife handle like I'm revving a motorcycle, or like I'm riding a mountain bike down a very steep incline and I don't want to let go, because if I let go I'm going to crash. So I'm going to come in nice and close, stay nice and close to those bones, and cut that excess fat and connect the tissue off. And I'm going to do that now. This way it's a little bit easier. I can spin it, come in right against the bones here, and follow that down and out. Schwingus. Nice and clean. So what I'm doing is I'm removing the fat and I'm cutting through the elastin that's surrounding the bone. The elastin wraps around the bone like this. Okay? And once I make an incision, I open it up, and then I can pull the bone out, which makes it easier. Now, we're not going to pull the bones out of these, but I am going to cook them as though I would cook baby back ribs, because they're delicious, and it makes it easier. I don't want to have that elastin in place there. Okay? Now, these feather bones I can take off as well. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take the feather bones off. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for the next step. So I'm going to come in right here, and I'm following those feather bones, which you can see right here. I'm just going to come in against them, and I'm going to start it out. What I'm doing is I'm basically angling my blade towards the bone. So I'm going to put my fingers in, use my thumb and my finger to push that open, and let gravity assist me in following those ribs down. So I just came in against the bones, and I followed those down and cut them off so it comes off nice and clean. It just makes it easier for the next step. I'm going to fabricate those out of the way, use them for my bone pile. Okay, so now when we look at the back where I just took that off, this is where I just removed the feather bones from this area right here. This is where the chine bone would be, and you can see the little button bones. We'll come back and remove those in a moment. And these are the rib bones. Okay, so that kind of puts it in perspective. Now, if I were going to cut a bone-in steak out of this, it would be delicious. I could French it a little bit, call it a cowboy steak. It would be a bone-in ribeye steak. It's an incredible steak. Leaving the bone in is going to impart flavor. It's also going to provide a foundation and help to reduce shrinkage when we cook it. Reducing shrinkage is always good. Okay, so we're going to come in and we're going to follow those ribs down. So now what I do is I position it so that I can kind of come in against the bones. So I'm going to come in and just ride those ribs down. Okay? So I position it so I can let gravity assist me. I'm going to follow those bones down. I come in, I make my first incision against the bones, and then with each cut that I make, I'm going to pull that meat back a little bit, and as I pull it back, the rigidity of the fat, because it's cold, is going to provide me or allow me an opportunity to see those bones a little bit more clearly. So follow those bones back even more. Okay, so just get right in there. Utilize the wedge of your thumb and index finger and just keep coming down. Keep cutting that meat back, so I'm pulling it apart as I go. Okay, so with each cut that I make, I just keep angling my blade into the bone. So I'm turning my blade and I'm angling it into the bone so I don't cut into the ribeye. Just keep cutting back. Okay, and I'm going to follow that down and keep following it. And now this is where gravity, of course, becomes very handy and super friendly. I'm just going to follow that down and let it keep turning. I keep angling my blade towards the bone so that I don't jeopardize the integrity of my ribeye. I'm going to take that off, and then we'll work on cleaning up those ribs real quick. I'm just going to set the ribeye out off to the side for 1 second. Okay. Another thing that you'll get on your board a lot as you are cutting is you'll get little bits of fat on there. And one of the easiest ways to clean up your station is to use a bench scraper. So just it cleans up all the goobers, all the fat that's stuck there. Helps keep a nice clean station, which freaks me out a little bit when it's not clean. All right, so then we're going to flip it over. So this is where we just took the rib off. It's nice and clean. You can tell we just took it off because it hasn't oxidized yet. It's nice and kind of ruby red. We're going to flip it over, and we're going to take these bones out. This is the residual piece of the chine bone, and you can see it moving independent of the ribs because it actually has kind of a funky joint. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get in there at the joint, cut where my fingers are wiggling, and pop it out, and that's essentially what we're trying to do, theoretically. So we're going to come in at an angle, and we're going to get that joint started, and sometimes it works really well. So this is the joint that I'm talking about. So once you see the joint, then you're going to come back around. Okay, so come back around this way, and then come in this way. Okay, and now you can see the joint right there. So once I see the joint starting to open, then I can come in at a slight angle, come down, and back around. Okay, same thing here. So come down until I can find the joint. Once I've found the joint, I can come in at an angle that makes it easier to get it out, come down, and back around. Okay? And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get this piece off. Now, this is delicious meat here. Don't get me wrong. This tastes amazing. The reason that I want to take it off is because I'm going to cook these kind of like baby back ribs, and I want to be able to cut them and serve them. So I cut on the bone like this so that I have this beautiful portion here. So that's the only reason that I'm taking this off. And that's also why I put it into my stocks, because it's going to have a tremendous amount of connective tissue and meat that's going to be great in my stock. I don't want to throw this away. This is delicious. So keep coming back here into that joint, back around, into the joint, back around, and off. So that comes off nice and clean. Okay? And now these are ready for processing. This, sometimes you'll get gashes that happen. It's going to cook up just the same. You'll never know that that was there. It's going to be delicious. It looks like I did not take a bite out of it, so it came like that. And that's just sometimes the processing part. Don't throw these away. These are delicious. Highly underutilized. If you've ever been to Texas, they're big on beef ribs, and they will not let you down. Cook them just like baby back ribs. A little bit longer. If you're going to cook them in an oven, I do them at 300, wrapped in foil, double foil, little stock in there, salt and pepper, 300 for 4 hours. So, and then pull them out, let them cool a little bit, and they're delicious. So that's it. Any of the excess fat comes out just to keep it nice and clean. That makes it healthy, makes it lean, because you've taken all the fat out. Just kidding. It's not happening, right? So, all right, cool. So there's our ribs. Those are done. They're good to go. We're going to slide that off to the side. We're going to take this and put it into our bone pile, and we're going to come back and finish up that ribeye. When we look at the ribeye from the end, if you've ever had a ribeye steak and you're cooking it on the grill, sometimes there's this kind of suspect piece that falls off the grill. Well, at least it falls off at my house, or maybe I persuade it to fall off. But this piece right here is delicious. This is the Scarapelli. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you a slightly different way of doing it. Not the do-all, end-all, just a different way of doing it. This is the ribeye heart steak, and this is the fat. And sometimes people who are not purists don't love ribeyes. They don't like this fat. If you like ribeyes, you're not going to have a problem with this. But if you are wanting a heart-healthy ribeye, then you should have a turkey burger. Anyway, so you're going to take this, and you're going to turn it around, and we're basically going to pull this cap off. So you're going to follow the seam up to here, you're going to follow it down on the side, and you're going to come in right here at this seam, and you're going to pull that back. So I'm just following the seam up, and what I'm doing is I'm seaming out the meat, removing the Scarapelli from the ribeye, And if it gets stuck, then I use my knife. But for the most part, you should be able to just kind of roll it out with your finger. This is a cool example of being able to see great connective tissue demonstration. So this kind of webby stuff here, the webby stuff is reticulin, right? So it's kind of weird. It connects muscle to muscle or fat to muscle. And then this stuff right here, this thick stuff, is called elastin. And elastin is responsible for connecting muscle to bone or bone to bone. We know that more readily as ligaments and tendons. So it's a cool example of seeing what goes on. The connective tissue that we primarily use for seaming muscles is called reticulin. So I'm capitalizing on following that line of reticulin, which helps me to separate that muscle out, right? And I know I'm going to find the end when I get to here. So I'm basically following it down to that point where it's connected. And for the most part, it's just kind of rolling out. All right, so pull that off. So it comes off nice and clean. And when I get to the bottom, then I can go ahead and cut that off. And I'm going to come back to this ribeye again. I keep putting it off to the side, but we'll come back to that in a second. All right? I'm going to take a minute, clean up my station. I don't like a dirty board. Also, a really important thing to do as you're cutting is to keep your handle and your hand clean. Your handle gets slippery and your knife starts to slide. It's no bueno. It's not good for anyone. Okay? So, now, we come back. Now we have the Scarapelli. It looks like this big, funky mass of meat. But you're going to roll it out. This chunk of fat comes out. So you just follow that chunk of fat off. Take that off and put that into your fat pile. Trim this over here. This is all fat. And the reason I know that it's fat is when I cut into it, there's no meat. But also, when I touch it, it's hard. Because it's beef fat's going to be solid at room temperature. When we apply heat to it, it's become liquid. So I want to make that easier, make it clean. Now, the other thing that I can do is sometimes it's hard to get my knife across here, and I'll end up jeopardizing the integrity of this meat over here. What this allows me to do is I can turn it, fold it backwards, and really work on focusing on certain pieces of that elastin as it comes off. I want to cut through it, and then I want to angle my blade up into the elastin and take that off nice and clean so I don't jeopardize cutting any excess meat off of here. And I'm going to put the elastin into my bone pile because it is elastin, it's connective tissue. Most importantly, I paid for it, and it's going to be a great benefit to my stocks. Now just keep rolling it till I can get all that connective tissue off of there. Well, if I drop in, I just want to get back on track so that I take off as little of the meat as possible. This is a great way to have practice. If you're having someone that's starting to cut tenderloins, the Scarapelli is going to be less expensive than the tenderloin. And once they start taking off that silver skin super clean from the Scarapelli, then you can have them just translate that right to the beef tenderloin, and they'll be champions. Good confidence builder here, where they're not going to jeopardize. That's fat, so that's okay. I'm going to leave that on there. Keep rolling it until I get it all off. Just keep cutting. Just keep cutting. All right, so keep going until we get that all off. Okay, and then I got some fat over here. So this is what I'm looking at right now. So this fat on the end. So I should be able to come in with my thumb underneath here and peel that back and take that fat off. I knew that the fat was thick because, again, I can feel the hardness. So I'm not kind of cutting blindly. I'm cutting based on what the fat feels like when I'm touching it. Sometimes you'll see people, they're doing this. It looks weird. They're not fondling the meat, they're actually feeling where the fat is so they have a better idea of where to cut and just keep it clean to get the excess fat off there. Okay, so follow that down, trim that fat off there, come back around there. Cool. Trim this back around here so we get that fat off. Again, this is just one way of cutting it. It's not the do-all, end-all way. And this is the method that I use here is just to show you a couple of different ways. Generally, if I was going to do rib roasts, I'd do the whole rib to rib roasts. And if I was going to fabricate Scarapelli and steaks, I'd do the whole ribeye to Scarapelli and steaks. So it's not the way to cut. It's just an example of a way to cut. It's what I want my students to understand in their class. So that's where this comes from. So trim off the excess meat there, trim it back around, take this silver skin off here, And if you've ever had that little piece of meat that comes off while you're grilling, it has a good amount of gristle in it, but it's my most favorite piece of meat. I think it's the most flavorful piece from the animal, and that's where it came from. I just wanted to capitalize on that flavor, so by taking all that off. So I'm doing two piles. I have a pile of fat that I can use for rendering, and I have a pile of silver skin, which you saw me get confused there. So fat's over here, silver skin's over here. Silver skin is going to go to bones, fat's going to go to rendering. Pull that up and off, and I like to pull as much as possible. This is a cool piece of connective tissue. This is called the backstrap, and the backstrap is a very thick band of connective tissue that actually works to help hold the head upright, and it's a great example of how elastin works, or how strong it can be. So that goes to my bone pile as well. And then when I get most of that cleaned up, I'm not going to take all of the fat off, but I want to take some of the fat off so that it's a nice piece for grilling. This is an awesome piece for grilling. I've also taken it and rolled it up and used a little meat glue. I know there's some out there that are not big fans of meat glue, but it has its place. And so I would take it, I would roll up, put meat glue in here and roll it up, so once it's done, it looks like this awesome, so I can cut a steak out of that, and it looks like a killer fillet, but it has flavor. So that was the primary difference. So that's our Scarapelli. Looks like a flank steak, but tastes amazing. Super delicious. Cook it to medium rare. Get it in your mouth. It will make you super happy, and smile when you need to smile. Okay? So now we're going to come back to that ribeye. Place our Scarapelli over there. This is going to go to our bone pile. This is all the silver skin and trim from the Scarapelli. We're going to put the fat into our fat pile, and that's what we use for rendering to make tallow, and so on. So that just goes right into our fat pile. And then we're going to give our board a little scrape, and we'll bring our ribeye back. So the ribeye comes back, and now we're going to cut steaks out of that ribeye. Okay, to cut steaks, what we're going to do is I like to cut the steaks individually and then trim the fat off of them individually. I would usually use a long steak knife, or a big, almost looks like a scimitar, more of a butcher's knife. But I'll show you how to do it with a chef's knife as well. So what we're going to use for this is a chef's knife. So we're going to take it. I also like to make thick steaks. I like to cut them thicker so that when I'm training students how to grill a steak, they have a lot more flexibility in understanding how to grill that piece of meat, so it doesn't go from cooked perfectly to overcooked in a matter of seconds. So you want to do a nice long stroke. This knife's a little short, but we're getting the idea of it. So once I cut my steaks off, so I'm going to cut it, and once I get the steak off, now I'm going to trim that fat up just a little bit. So I'm working on trimming each steak individually, and I don't have to trim a tremendous amount of fat off of it. I'm going to look at both sides and make sure that that looks nice and clean. Right, so now we have a ribeye steak, so that goes there, nice and ribeye-ish. And this piece, you probably guessed already where it's going to go, because you're super smart, you've been paying attention. We're going to trim this off, any of the kind of aged color, we're going to trim that off, but we're going to use this for our grinding pile, because it's pretty decent for grinding. This will go into our fat pile for rendering. Alright, so we're just going to keep cutting steaks out of that. So we're just going to score it. Score, score, score. And cut steaks nice long strokes all the way down through. Cut down. Take that meat off. Take your steak, clean it up, cut it so it's nice and clean. And that little tip of fat is going to be indicative of a ribeye. Make sure that it looks good on both sides, and then lay it out for display. Perfect. Trim off any excess meat you might have. Come back and trim those up. Cool. Make sure it looks good on both sides. Nice steak. Cool. Fat goes to the fat pile. Trim that up as well. Cool. Just keep cutting. Cool. Alright, and then our last steak here. Trim that up. Now, sometimes, based on the shape that you have, you're going to have it be a little wedgy. So what I do is, I kind of say it's like spreading cold peanut butter. So you don't want to just smack it, you want to kind of smack and spread. So that you get it more uniform, right? So that's what we're looking for there. So there's our steaks. And that's the end cut, so I'll put that toe to toe. And then you can come back, and I would use a boning knife to clean out any excess meat that you had that you can use for grinding. And that's what we would do from that point there. Any little pieces of meat. Cool. All right. And there we have a ribeye.